Let's just solo the kick. No, it's probably still boxy there. But as I turn that EQ on and off, you can actually hear the kick just, it cleans itself up a little bit. And then I've got utility on there simply for gain control. Again, I do all my mixing as I go, and I use utility to set the level so that if I want to automate volume later on, I can do that with the channel faders, and I've got more resolution because they're all set to 0 dB. That's why I do that. I tend not to do a lot of volume automation, and I've probably even got into the habit of using utility as the volume automation source anyway, because you can still gain stage effectively with compression makeup gain, which is probably a bad habit, but sometimes I do it. Now the bass line, we have got some processing on this kick and bass bus as well, but we'll look at that in a second. The bass line, I'm running the Evergreen Poly 6 bass. No, not that one. And again, the reason I used it is just because it happened to work. Poly 6 bass is probably used, this is one of the presets I did for the synthwave pack, is probably used in 10% of all synthwave tracks. Back in the day when synthwave first started becoming a thing, maybe a decade ago, probably maybe even half the synthwave tracks ever made used this kind of sound. Originally from the Korg Poly 6 synth / plugin, but we can recreate it in other plugins as well, which is what I've done here. And again, everything I've used is either Kick 2, Ana 2, Ableton Native, or there's one free plugin I've used, which we'll have a look at in a minute, which is Tal Chorus. That's the only third-party plugin I've used, but it is free, so you guys can download that as well. I think I've only used it once or twice, though. So in terms of kick processing, let's just group all of this together. So again, it's just tightening up the sound a little bit. So in terms of EQ, I've rolled off at 44 Hertz. Don't need to take a huge amount off. I've notched out a little bit 107. If you have a listen to this, this is very boxy. It's like that woofy sound. And if you don't get rid of these sounds, especially in bass and kicks, that frequency range can really add up and start sounding like, I use the word woofy a lot, that kind of sound in the background, and it'll build up subtly, and you won't know where it's coming from. So keep an eye on it per channel. Auto filter is just there for transition effects. It's not doing anything in terms of processing for the sound of the bass. The compressor is only being used for sidechain, and the source is, as I mentioned, from this sidechain channel, which is running 4 on the floor. It's not following the kick pattern, but I wanted that one, that ducking sound. And then finally, we've got utility, which I'm using for level, but I'm also using for this bass mono. This is quite important. So anything under 120 Hertz is being pushed straight into mono, because this is quite a wide bass sound and it can start to sound very messy in the mix if you don't do this. So have a listen to it. I'm not getting a massive effect on these speakers because I've got them quite low, but on headphones it makes a big difference, and it also makes a difference in the mix, which we'll probably try and look at later on. So that's actually quite high. 120 Hertz is quite high. Usually I might go around 80 to 100, but in this instance I felt that 120 was the right frequency to go for when I listen to everything together. And again, I do most of my mixing as I go. There's very little I will do after the effect. Sometimes I'll listen to a track the next day and things will need tweaking, but generally speaking I do all of this as I go. We will have a look at overall mixing again later on, but most of it will already be done. So the last thing to look at is the bus processing. Now again, I've got an EQ on this. I'm taking out anything below 40 Hertz because we don't need it. And I'm also notching out 141. So again, listening to this in solo. Slightly above the woofy section. And then I've just got a little bit of glue compression. It's not doing a lot. If you have a look, it's really just catching the peaks of the kick. But it does help glue the sounds together. Let me switch it on and off and you'll see what I mean. So it's quite loose like that, but when I switch it on, just feel everything kind of, it's like audio liposuction. You'll also notice, if you're listening, the bass is moving around a bit, and this is because the original Poly 6 bass, one of the magical things about that particular bass sound is that the kind of oscillator phasing, which a lot of the time in electronic music you don't want. You don't want the bass sound phasing around because you want it static. Psytrance, again, is that perfect example of a bass line that is on perfect phase all the time, every note exactly the same. But synthwave is a bit looser, it's a bit more free form, so I'm quite happy to leave that kind of moving bass sound as is. Right, that's pretty much it for the kick and bass, the fundamental foundation of the track. There's not a lot going on. You may think, hang on a minute, that still sounds a bit loose, but I do have a lot of mastering, which is all switched off at the moment. And I always have that in mind when I'm making these kinds of tracks, because I kind of know where I'm going to go with the mastering later on. So a lot of this will be tied up with mastering, which is apparently not what you're supposed to do, but who cares? That's what I do. Next video, we're going to look at percussion. There's not a lot of percussion in this track. You'll be surprised at how little there is. We'll bring in the hats and the snare. So I'll see you there.